Psalm 88 this morning, and so before she does that, we're just going to read a whole passage from Psalm 88, just to give us some context. And you can follow along on the screen behind us.
Amen. After, when we're done, we're just going to kind of leave a moment of silence, let it sink in, and as Kate makes her way, we're just going to turn the words of the psalmist over.
So this is, the beginning is the superscript before the psalm. So it says, a song of the sons of Korah for the director of music. According to Mahalath Leannoth, a maskil of Haman the Ezrahite. Lord, you are the God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care.
You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath flies heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. You have taken from me my closest friends. You have made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion?
But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and I am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend.
So this series is called Psalms Greatest Hits. And a few people questioned me why I picked that one. So when you heard that, what genre's top charts would you put that in? Is that something you would hear on the radio?
Country?
All right, so I'll come back to the question of genre, because I do think it's important, but I would want to review a little what Tom started this series with in terms of the context of the Psalms. So the Psalms spanned a 1,000-year period. There are 150 of them that were kind of collected into one book, but they weren't written as one continuous thing. They were written over the whole story of the Bible. Not the whole, a large portion of the Bible. And just think for a minute, what 1,000 years looks like in terms of music. If we look 1,000 years back from now, church music was just chant. If we look back 700 years, singing in harmony, like Ben and Amanda were doing, was banned by the Pope. So if we tried to collect the 150 best church songs of the last 1,000 years, we have Gregorian chant, next to hymns from Martin Luther, next to Baroque oratorios, next to songs we sing today, and probably several things we've forgotten about in the time since then. Also, the 150 Psalms are over a variety of authors. Moses wrote some of them. Those are the earliest ones written when he wrote the first books of the Bible. King David wrote the majority of them. I think that's probably the most well-known author of the Psalms. And then there are miscellaneous other people, particularly priests, people that were serving God in the tabernacle and later the temple. We also have different types of psalms. This is just the same list that Tom had up in the intro, but again, I think it's important to remember lament is one of the types of psalms. I did hear someone mention that as a genre. Yes, this is a psalm of lament. But there's also all these other ones too. So again, think about that 1,000-year span of history, multiple different authors, and all these different types of songs. We have a wide array of music. It's not just what we think of as church music now, not just what we think of as any one particular genre's greatest hits. So let's look at that superscript for a little more context for this one. Haman the Ezrahite is not someone that we hear elsewhere in the Bible. There's not much known about him. From what I could find, the best scholarship is that he was probably serving in the tabernacle under King David, possibly appointed by King David. So this is a contemporary of most of the Psalms of David. The sons of Korah would indicate that he's one of the priests assigned to specifically the role of leading people in music publicly. For the director of music, that's kind of an indication that, this is when you're supposed to lead all the people. This is for the public when they gather. So it's not, again, back to kind of those different genres. This is not one man's private prayer. This is not someone confessing their thoughts directly to God, although it is that. This is something that is meant to be shared by someone like Ben, come up front, lead the congregation together in it. These next two notes are a little more obscure. A maskil, that's in a lot of the Psalms. Again, direct translation, not really known. It usually has something along a contemplation, a well-written song. Again, not a term we still use. That's why it's not a direct English translation. But it is a lot in the Psalms. And then the final one, the Mahalath Leona. Not something that we really know. That was lost to time what that means. It could refer to specific instrumentation. So it could be, this one's for piano, or this one's for guitars, or it could be more of like a mood, like this one's sort of more a dark and somber mood. In either case, it only shows up for somber songs, both in the Psalms and stuff outside of the Bible. So, kind of an indication of either instrumentation that probably connotes a specific mood, or the mood that it would mean to them. So to summarize what this means in contemporary terms, Psalm 88 is a well-written contemplative song meant to be sung together or for the average person in a well-known to the time musical style that connotes a somber and reflective thought. So, and I did hear one person yell it out, and I didn't call it out before, but yes, I would say Psalm 88 is a country song. Like country music, I think this song shows the raw emotions of the writer. They don't shy away from the hard things. They don't avoid or step away from suffering or hard thoughts. They put it out there. Everything's out there for us to see. So now, with that bit of context, let's see what we can learn from it. The first big idea is the Psalms and the whole Bible are big enough for the whole range of human experiences. Kind of like Tom said with communion, even Jesus quoted the Psalms on the cross. That's about the lowest of lows that a human has experienced. We also have other Psalms that are the highest of highs. There's the room for the whole range of experience. There's some Psalms that are triumphs, some that are joyful. We had ones at the beginning that we read for entering into worship. And then there's this. I'm going to use the word despair. I think you could use a lot of different words for what the emotion below this is. But I'm going to call it despair. And my point here is the Psalms and the whole Bible are big enough for all the big feelings, as we say to the little kids. Jesus experienced it on the cross, calling out to his Father. He also experienced the same feeling as the psalmist the night before he went to the cross, or the night before he was arrested, when he felt betrayed by his friends. We also have the book of Job, that I think is probably the closest to this. Job, for those of you that don't know, is a man that loses basically everything in his life and has a conversation directly with God that is pretty unsatisfying. We also have the prophets. A lot of the prophets have stories of despair and dread and anguish. Elijah is well known for this. He specifically asks God to let him die. And that brings me to this picture that you may remember from our last couple sermon series. It's just it's a example of a of the arc of a story. So a lot of the stories in the Bible start with someone up high, everything's good, normal, then they get brought down low, humble, despair. Again, varies by the story exactly what the low experience is. For Jesus, it was on the cross with that feeling of God forsaking him. Some of the stories in Genesis, it was the individual's own sin that brought them low. And then at the end, they're again elevated, maybe brought higher than before. So again, this is a pattern through the Bible. It is a pattern of the stories. And I think it's helpful to keep in mind that this psalm is a point in this pattern that we see throughout the Bible. And that brings me to my second big idea, which is that despair is an ordinary part of our lives. And that's hard to hear. We don't want this to be an ordinary part of our lives, especially if you're a Christian. You want to say, well, I have Jesus, I don't have these hard feelings. But Jesus himself had that. So I want to be very clear what I don't mean by despair, because I think when I say this is an ordinary part and you should expect it and it's going to happen, there's two ways we go wrong on this. Number one is we go too far to looking for a cause. We say, these bad things are happening to me because X, Y, Z, because I didn't pray, because I sinned, because you name it. And that makes sense. We want to make meanings. Like we said, there's a pattern. We want to see the pattern. And sometimes bad things happen for a reason. But the truth is, bad things sometimes just happen. That's how the world is. Remember, Jesus experienced this on the cross. And like Tom said, it wasn't that God turned away from him because of something he did. It wasn't because Jesus didn't sin. Jesus didn't do something to earn it. Sometimes despair just happens because the world is hard. On the other hand, sometimes we see suffering as a good thing. We see, well, so-and-so suffered and grew in this way, or so-and-so became this great this because of a hard time they went through. And sometimes there's a little part of you that's like, well, maybe I need to wallow in this a little. Maybe I need to make my life harder. We don't put it in those terms, but I think sometimes we see that as a good thing, and we see it as making us holy and what we need. That is also wrong. Despair is ordinary, but not something we should seek out. Specifically, if you are given a way out of it, you should take that. If you're clinically depressed and clinical help is appropriate, that is a good thing. If you're grieving, we have plenty of ways to help people grieving. You don't need to be in it longer just to gain something from it. So now that I've made that very clear, because I don't want you to think despair is a good thing, this is 1 out of 150 songs. We're going to now look at what we do with that. So similar to how we've looked at a variety of people throughout the Bible, like I said, Genesis, Jesus, all the way through, Christian history also has a lot to teach us about despair, dark feelings, hard times. Some of you may have heard an expression here that you probably don't hear outside of church, called the dark night of the soul. That comes from a poet in the 16th century. His name is St. John of the Cross. The original poem is actually in Spanish. I know a lot of you read and speak Spanish. I'm not going to read it here. But it's called La Noche Oscura del Alma. And that's been something, again, from the 16th century, beautiful poem about that dark experience that has stuck with us throughout the centuries. A more recent example that I'm sure many of you have seen is this. It's a little tough to see, but if you can't read, it says Footprints in the Sand. I'm sure anyone that was within 30 feet of a church in the 90s has seen this poem. It was everywhere. I first specifically remember being in my grandmother's bathroom, but it was postcards, bookmarks, again, literally everywhere. For probably the few of you that may have not seen it, the gist of it is a man looking back at his life, speaking with God, and most of his life he sees two sets of footprints in the sand, his and God's. And then when he looks back and he sees the hard times, there's only one set of footprints. And he says, God, why'd you leave me in the hard times? And then at the end, God says, those are my footprints, I was carrying you. Which I think is a good example of how our psalmist feels in this situation. He thinks he's alone, and he thinks God has abandoned him. And again, this was everywhere, and this next comic is something that apparently was in enough places. This is not what I thought of when I said footprints in sand, but both Matt and Tom referenced this when I told them I would be mentioning footprints in the sand. So this was also very popular. And the psalmist might be a little bit dragged, kicking and screaming. So now that we've kind of seen, again, this is a pattern that we see throughout the Bible, throughout the Psalms specifically, and throughout Christian history. Now you're probably wondering, is this just something I have to accept? Is there something I can do about this? So let's talk about the practical side of it, because I think it's hard to talk about despair without going into what can I do. So before you're in that moment of despair, this is your eat your vegetables and exercise phase. This is where you build up the skills and the strengths that are going to carry you through hard times. All of these before things you're gonna have heard before a million times. Like eating your vegetables, you know these are the things you should do, you know these are the things that are gonna make you strong. We'll get to why you specifically have to do with despair in a minute. So before, you want to read your Bible. You want to memorize verses. These are things, again, we all know are good to do. You want to sing songs that have truth in them. Songs stick in your head like nothing else. Whether those are songs that teach you Bible verses, songs that teach you words of wisdom, songs that have truth in them are a really important tool that we have. You want to form habits of prayer and worship. Like exercise, prayer and worship are habits. The more you do them, the easier they will get. You're not going to just, some people do pick up praying in a crisis, and that's great. But you want to have that as a tool you are ready to use and that you have as a habit you formed. And you want to build your community. Again, things everyone knows, easier said than done, I know, but you want to have a community that knows you and that knows when something is wrong. You want a community that loves God and loves you, so that when you're in those dark times, reaching out to them becomes natural. It's really hard to reach out to people when you're in a dark time. That's not the time to make new friends. You want to have a community that already knows you. An example of this in the Psalms is probably the most common psalm people talk about. Even if you haven't read the whole book of Psalms, you've probably heard Psalm 23. In Psalm 23, the psalmist says, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil." He knows that he will walk through a dark valley. He's preparing himself that he will not fear it. All right, next is during. This is where our psalmist is. This is where we've been most of the time. The number one goal of the during the despair phase is to endure. You're going to last through it. Again, you remember the pattern. Bad times will happen. Next, you want to call out to God. It's hard. Like our psalmist, like Jesus on the cross, you may not feel that God is there. You may feel God's turned his face away. It's really hard to call out to God when you don't feel that warm, reciprocal feeling. But you want to, again, have those patterns, have that faith that will sustain you through. This is meant to be temporary. What's the next one? Sorry. You want to hold on to your community. That's it. It's hard. And this is one I know personally is the hardest for me in the during. You don't want to reach out to people. Like our psalmist, he feels repulsive to his friends. It's hard. And that's why you've got to have that community in advance. I know personally, sometimes in the hardest times, just telling one person and telling them it's okay to let other people know. That may be all you can do, but that will sustain you. That's how we have prayers, practical support, how community carries us through these times. Again, this was a psalm for public consumption. This was not one man just kind of sitting and wallowing on his own. I don't know what that looked like then. I don't know if he brought this, I don't think he got up front and shared it with everybody when he was in the midst of it. like I said, he makes it seem like he is repulsive to his friends, God's turned away from him, but somehow he's calling out to God, he's holding on to the people around him, even though it doesn't feel good, and even though it feels hard. And then the final thing to do during is a skill that may be new. I don't think we've talked about it here before, but it's talk to yourself. I'm going to read a quote for you guys about talking to yourself. Because I think an author that my family particularly likes explains it well. When you wake up in the morning, you can listen to whatever your thoughts are telling you. Maybe they're reminding you of something bad you did the day before. Maybe they're making you scared of something you have to do tomorrow. You can listen and feel horrible, or you can talk back. You can remind yourself of what is true, of who you are and who God is and what He has done. You can say something like, "Why am I discouraged? Why is my heart so sad? I will put my hope in God." Psalm 42:11. Are you listening to yourself today or talking to yourself? So this author specifically references talking to yourself as songs, and this is where having them memorized and at the tip of your tongue is really, really helpful. Other ways I like to talk to myself are with all those other things from the before phase. Words from the Bible, words from people that know me, songs that have truths in them. This is where also knowing yourself and having people that know you is helpful. You need to know when you're in a dark place, what are the truths that I most need to be reminded of. I know my tendencies to do things in my own strength, to not rely on God. So I personally find talking to myself when I'm in a dark place with songs like "Lord, I Need You" really helpful. But if you're someone not actively in despair right now, planning ahead for this talking to yourself is probably the best takeaway from this you can do. Think about, what do I need when I'm in those dark places? What do I need to be reminded of? What am I most likely to forget about God, about myself, about my community? Prepare yourself again with those habits and exercise. Now you may be thinking, what about growing? Aren't we supposed to grow through despair? Aren't we supposed to mature and build our character? That's not what you want to think about in the during. And if you're coming alongside someone that's going through a hard time, that's going through despair, the last thing they need is one more thing to worry about. So don't tell them to grow. Don't tell them to think about all the ways that you'll see what God did. Don't tell them, think about all the good that's going to come out of this. It will, but that's not what you need the reminder during. So now, in the after, that's the time to grow. Again, I think we all know it. I think we know that good things come from hard times. If you read the stories of some of the people we mentioned before, Jesus, St. John of the Cross. St. John of the Cross was in a solitary prison cell for 7 years before he wrote the poem that we still reference today. He doesn't need to be reminded of all the good that's going to come from it in that moment. Some people may find that helpful, most will not. After is when you can help people to grow. Look back in your experience, like the author of Footprints in the Sand, say, there's where I saw God working. There's where God carried me. There's where God dragged me kicking and screaming. And you tell your story. This is really important, and it's also really hard. We want to talk about the good things. We talk about the good things God's done for us. Telling your story doesn't have to be telling a whole room of people. It doesn't have to be writing a poem that's going to last for centuries. Telling the one or two people closest to you encourages them and helps you to process what you've gone through. It's an important way that we, again, I think in telling our story and reflecting to others, it's an important way we look back and see what God was doing through that. And then also, the other step for after is unfortunately to repeat the before. We always have to eat our vegetables. Just because you've gone through despair once doesn't mean it's a one-time, once-in-a-lifetime experience. You may go again, so you want to go back to all those good habits, good exercises that have sustained you through. When Tom first introed the Psalms and talked about the laments, he said that 99% of the laments have a point where the psalmist turns around and has some realization. When Leanne talked about kind of summarizing Genesis, she talked about how all the stories have a moment where, but God, where they turn around and God did something. This is the one psalm that doesn't, and that's pretty normal reflection, I think, of the pattern of our lives. We shouldn't dwell in a place where we don't turn around and see it. But there will be those times where you just can't see what God's doing yet. And that is, again, a normal, ordinary experience. But all of those other Psalms of Lament are a great example of this after phase, where the person turns around, where they see the but God. One of my favorites is Psalm 73. In this psalm, the psalmist is lamenting all the bad in the world, kind of that what we talked about at the beginning, all the hard things in the world. And then in the middle he says, when I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply, till I entered the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their final destiny. And then again, a few more verses on that same theme, and then I will tell of all of your deeds. So again, so that's the same pattern that we see. He looks back, he sees what God was doing, and then he tells people about it. So yeah, you can go on to that next one, back to this pattern. The up and down. So the pattern of our lives is normal. It is ordinary. You're going to go through it. If you haven't yet, you will have dark times. There will be highs and lows. And unfortunately, while this is a helpful, the one up and down is a helpful way to think of one story, one isolated instance, the grand scheme of our lives looks more like this. It's going to be a roller coaster. There are high highs and low lows. Sometimes you'll be on your way up, sometimes you'll be on your way down. But you have to remember the lows don't last. And the skills that we have will carry us through. So just to summarize, if we go to the final one, wherever you are on that roller coaster, one of these three applies to you. All of these are in the Psalms, all of these are throughout the Bible. If you're actively in despair right now, you're not alone. I encourage you to do as much of the during as you can. If you're not in that, the two things I want you to take away are one, that talk to yourself. Think about how you want to talk to yourself. What verses, what songs, what truths do you want to remember? You can build those up. Again, it's not anything special to build those up. Those are all the ordinary walk of Christian life things we do. And then if you're going alongside someone, encourage them, build them up. Don't be afraid of the lows. The lows are in the Psalms, the lows are in the Bible, the lows are in Jesus' story. It's not something you did, it's just an ordinary part of life. Let's pray. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the example you have for us there. And thank you for the ways that Jesus modeled this for us and showed us that we can call out to you even when we don't feel you with us. Thank you for your words in the Psalms, and I pray that you would lay them on our hearts, have it at the tips of our tongues, and have us able to access them when we most need them, and then we would use them to grow closer to you.